Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I figured I might take my time at lunch today to talk to you all. I have been scribbling down some notes over the last couple of weeks. This is sort of a impromptu lecture discussion stream of consciousness, although as you'll see in a minute when I turn my camera on, I do have notes for today. And it's been a myriad of things covering the ongoing description about wars of belief. And we're going to be talking about that today. So before I begin, hello everyone. I hope that you are all doing well. And here are my notes for today. It's a whole page worth of stuff. Ignore the coffee stains, but that's how you know someone put effort into it, is that they have a coffee stain on their paper. I remember getting a +5 on my one of my term papers in college because my professor noticed a coffee stain or a rim of a coffee cup along there. Because when I was in university, I had a diner I would always go to work, and Village Inn had free pie Wednesdays and stuff like that. But it was a genuinely good time and the like. So as you can tell from the title of today's stream, we'll be covering an issue of course, belief and what has been often called about sort of this will to existence or willpower, the will to just not only have power, but the will to thrive and to survive. And I feel like we're going to cover a myriad of topics. They're all going to be thoroughly outlined for today's discussion. And, I think that really the subtitle for this talk today would really just be, the challenge to or the will to a positive vision. Because something that I think has been determined, and I've talked about this already at the Sildings conference earlier this month earlier this year in the United States, and it's also been discussed, I think, quite heavily from both our more materially minded atheistic friends, but also our religious friends, both Christian and non-Christian as well. And so I'm going to sort of start with a discussion on the state of affairs, at least here in the United States. I know that things may vary depending on where you live. I know I have a vast international audience, and I'm very blessed for that. But I'm going to sort of outline things today based off some recent sketches of some statistics I was looking up earlier today. And I'm going to start off with, I think, one of the saddest ones that there has been, in part because I think this affects the discussions over human capital and qualified individuals, or those that make up the majority stock of the United States. In the United States in 2021, according to recently retrieved stats from the CDC earlier this year, suicide is the 11th leading cause of death, primarily middle-aged white men the most, and 70% of all suicides, regardless of age, in the United States are white men. Predominantly the group that tends to vote conservatively, as well as the ones that were probably, if we had sort of a gut check instinct, those are probably people that look like you or that you normally associate with when it comes to the online. In the United States, and more specifically here in the state of Texas, religiosity is on a downward trend, and it has been overall, where church attendance in the United States has finally reached 50% as of last year. But still, of course, this has overall the largest religiosity in the West when it comes to belief in God. However, when it comes to the issue of immigrant groups, this also leads to certain problems of various religions coming in that are not traditionally associated with the West. Of course, between atrocious economic conditions and according to the more recent changes in calculations of the Consumer Price Index over the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Treasury, inflation is still a problem. The prices of household goods are still higher than before, and the building costs for materials ranging from construction to even getting a mortgage on your home are still ridiculously high, although there are hopes for some people out there, especially in my audience, that are hoping for the bubble to pop. There was a report recently that came out with respects to the Dollar General, which prior to just a few years ago had seen a substantial growth in consumer or commercial real estate building and acquisition. So there was a point in time where most of the leading, I think it was 1 in 4 was the statistic that I read about a year or so ago, that in 2021, they were about 1/4 of all major construction for commercial real estate in the United States. For those of you who don't live in the United States, a Dollar General, like a Dollar Tree or a Pound Shop, are usually little convenience stores, semi-grocers that are for low-income areas. There are a lot of Dollar Generals where I live. I live out in BFE. It takes me quite a bit of time to really get to any major city in my region. And that's not even including traffic. And so I've seen a lot of growth of Dollar Generals around. However, the recent report that I had saw was that Dollar General had been suffering with respects to uh, their consumer base. Now, this is in part because I was reading how Dollar General, had fallen apart very quickly. In part because there was poor upkeep of these stores, whether it be broken freezers, flooding, dark bathrooms. Of course, when you're in a low-income area, this tends to attract those that are a little more desperate. But then, secondly, the biggest thing that I was reading is that a lot of the consumer bases that a lot of these Dollar Generals were hoping to attract, both in urban and in rural areas, is that a lot of these guys are simply just going towards food stamps, and they're going towards other forms of welfare and aid. So there's been a lot of concerns with how do we go and deal with our current state of affairs economically. There is a lack of hope in the country. There is sort of this general malaise, and I think that people give a lot of Jimmy Carter crap for that speech, but I think that it was a very Southern speech in the respects that, listen, the way in which our international market system is not working for people, we are enjoying a decadence problem more than we are a lifestyle problem, which contributes to unhealthy means in which, and that comes to a big problem. And so at the end of the day, you see on top of this a wide spanning range of questions of, well, what do we do? Where do we go from here? Where are the fathers? Where are the leaders and things? And this, I think, leads us to a great discussion about sort of the idolatrous and very saccharine, superficial ritualism that we have sort of writ large in the West, alongside some ghost dancing and some other issues. But we're going to get into a lot of that in today. And before I get any further, I will interact with chat as I always do. But of course, Entropy is the preferred way to send your questions. This is going to just sort of be a prepared thing, but we're going to get into it. So, this sort of remains to the point, I think, that we've seen with respects to Oswald Spengler and various other sort of cultural critics. This is the more cyclical side of history, but it illustrates that the will to live is just as important as your material or your economic health and conditions to there. Unemployment, of course, affects fertility writ large on a population. The general direction of the country affects how we, are we optimistic about having kids at this time? Do we feel like we could afford having a child right now? Because here in the United States and in most places in the West, you have to answer the economic question really before you answer anything else, and we'll get into that. But, I have this talk titled as The Idolatrous Age. And what do I mean by idols? What do I really just mean, no graven images or anything like that? Well, idols can be a lot of things. And this is where, if you're listening in right now, I have like 50% of my audience that says we love it when the Prudentialist does preachy, pastoral like rants, and then the other half is like, please shut the hell up. Well, only half of you are probably going to enjoy this then. But what kind of idols do we have? And I said this is the issue that I think we're trying to get down to. You have a different kind of religiosity that exists totally it exists like a duality principle, like how light is both a particle and a wave. You have an existing progressive heresy that is born out of various forms of Christianity, and then you also have this abstraction of, well, how do I exist to subvert the institutions that are already around me? If I were to look at the world and I'm not a part of this world and I'm not part of this tradition, how do I best use it to subvert expectations so it best fits my needs and what I desire? And so this is where I think when we talk about leftism or communism or progressivism, there can be some good intentioned things that are put in the progressive camp. I think that, of course, the agricultural aspects are pharmaceuticals. Those are things that I don't think should be just championed by progressives alone. After all, we have a monstrous pharmaceutical industry. We have a monstrous legal system that allows the Sackler family and Purdue Pharmaceuticals to take advantage of Chapter 11 bankruptcy and game the system so they can file it in which kind of court That way corporations get off scot-free. That's a huge issue. And this is something that more progressively minded people like Sohrab Ahmari and I would have agreement on. I don't think that that should be a leftist issue. Additionally, however, when we look at erasing institutions, erasing history, and saying that the past that you have no relation to, well, you view it in this oppressor oppressed, formula. People think that this is old talking points, but I think that the fact is that the right hasn't provided a really good answer to the intersectional framework for themselves. The thing that makes leftism work so well and getting these disparate groups is that you have a singular unified enemy, the oppressor, which in the case of the West and the United States, it's typically straight white males. This is why we have to deconstruct the history of the 1960s and 50s. This is why the opening episode of the pilot for Mad Men shows a successful drinking, smoking, philandering white man who doesn't know what to make of his life other than to just keep playing the charade and lose out on any sort of tradition. And that whole series sort of breaks down, everyone in the 50s and 60s, drank, smoked, either slapped their wives, cheated on their wives. We have to deconstruct a very well recorded, era of history where actually things were somewhat prosperous and people got along and there was homogeneity to it. But so this sort of brings the point that, to me, I always look at leftism as a idolatrous form of suicidal ideation on a civilizational scale. Whether it be the state-sponsored Extinction Rebellion or people talking about the desire to, not have children for the sake of the environment, or that we're going to enter this demographic crisis. So people like Peter Zeihan or people in the UK's Home Office will say that immigration will be the way to do it, and even the European Union will talk about the term replacement migration, almost as if to stick their tongues out at you when you talk about things like the Great Replacement. They'll just call it a more technical, bureaucratized term and go on from there. There is an idol, of course, towards the golden bull of the market, and that we can somehow all get along as long as we play up the consumer identities that exist here in the West, especially. If you go back a century ago to 1920, people would look back on the works of Frederick Jackson Turner and the closing of the American frontier, saying that the frontier of the United States was the greatest form of Americanization. An immigrant could come here, he could sort of, take off the old man of being a German, he could put on the moccasins of an Indian and try and carve his way out in the frontier, and at the end to become something that is unique to the American landmass and unique to the American culture of settler frontier colonialism. And this ties into sort of the Israel stuff too, where you'll see people, call the Israeli state a fascist or a Nazi state, because for a lot of progressives, they see them as an extension of white settler oppressive colonialism. And as Morgoth's review and others have pointed out, it really is just sort of the far right that notices distinct differences or is willing to call the fact out that they're not really white to begin with. But that's an aside for a later time. So what you see as a targeting here is that you have the issues of, well, what came before us must be taken down and erased. And I think that we saw this quite clearly on the issue of the Robert E. Lee statue. I've already written about this. I called it progressive iconoclasm. And I think that it's quite clear since the Charlottesville rally and the 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20 eras of trying to preserve these monuments has been sort of steamrolled rather effectively. Even in the town that I guess you could call my hometown, where my family is from, they had 2 Confederate memorials and, they haven't gone anywhere yet, but there have been multiple attempts by newly arrived peoples to get rid of them, despite the fact that where I live, quite a few of the men and the families here, a lot of family lines did disappear after the Civil War just because so many men were killed. So you have to erase what came before you. And this isn't, this is what Roger Scruton has talked about. This is what our friend Alexander Adams wrote in his 2020 book, Iconoclasm, Art and the Erasure of History and Identity Politics. That book is a really good introduction to understanding these things. I would actually recommend that, that would be a book you could give your parents, because it's not particularly edgy. It's not particularly spicy, but it just points out the very obvious that we live in a situation and in a civilization that is very much out and about to destroy what came before. And of course, immigration and other aspects come to it quite clearly. But this also leads you to the question of like, well, what are we propping up? What kind of idols are we propping up if we're trying to make our foes and their beliefs and their civic statues fall prostrate before the enemy? Well, quite clearly, you can see, I believe it's the mayor of New Orleans' little, mayor's mansion where they have the black hair pick. It's a giant, ugly, gaudy statue in there. There's sort of this progressive culture that focuses on sort of a racial idolatry that as the situation in America gets worse, all races more or less have seen a sharp increase in divorces, in single parent households, that you have a model to base yourself off of, and that you can sort of be kind of quasi ghettoized, or that you can embrace your own similar forms of, I guess, what you might call hood culture or something like that. And I think that you see this in a variety of ways, culturally speaking. A lot of SoundCloud mumble rappers. I was just doing some cursory reading at it. Turns out a lot of the most popular guys on there aren't black, but they're white, talking about very similar issues when it comes to not having a father around, or relationships, and not knowing how to conduct yourself. And that as we pursue this mechanism of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're going to witness the same kind of destruction that America witnessed with the black middle and upper classes in the 1950s and 60s, to where, that was destroyed within a generation. I mean, you want to talk about cultural genocide. The Great Society programs and this, push and pursuit of egalitarianism and equality destroyed any semblance of black wealth and black family and black fatherhood within a generation. This is why, despite some of the uglier aspects of segregation or lynching or whatever that you might have, or have a aversion to it, the period from Reconstruction to the Civil Rights Act were the most prosperous times economically and for families, for African Americans and the diaspora that moved towards the North. And that's sort of an uncomfortable question and what might get called a hate fact, but neither here nor there. At the end of the day, hope is not yet present in this age. And if you are a progressive white male outside of the long stock and barrel of classical Marxism, which still has a lot of like disaffected white guys or Bernie bros that move to like democratic socialism or whatever, you don't have a place within the progressive role model outside of suicide or being some sort of, maybe a bread tuber, or working in a progressive think tank and then having your job passed up in the name of diversity. Because I like asking people, well, what's the progressive straight white male role model? And the answer might just be Gavin Newsom. He's probably the one example of a successful white progressive, but he also comes from a long dynasty of successful white male progressives in California. But if you look at them, you were told that you were evil. You were told that you must pass up your inheritance for someone else. It's someone else's turn now, and that it encourages you to remove yourself from your bloodline. And so this is where the suicidal ideation comes in, where, if you're going to be a white male progressive, be a good ally and step aside, or let your own ideas literally kill you, as we've seen in the last several months with these progressive role models that have ended up on the wrong end of a knife or something and have died by their own belief. But additionally, if you ask, well, what is it? And, it might be a man in a dress. It might just be living your fullest life and having, quote unquote, your treats, as certain tankies and communists like to say. Or you embrace a nationalism by proxy. And that Marxism tends to lead to sort of the same kind of Leninist style, global communism, the Jackson Hinkles of the world, where third worldism is good. We'll take this progressive notion that, if all these white guys in the Midwest just became more Marxist, we could have MAGA communism achievable. And the hammer and sickle becomes an idol before the very ideas of the state and what you want to accomplish, and so on and so forth. So in turn, right, we have this ritualization of like, well, America used to, sports used to be fine. We all used to get along and enjoy sports. And all of a sudden, at the end of the, especially during 2020, 2021, and even still today, you have these quote unquote anti-racist messaging that are still on the football fields. They've kind of pulled back a little bit, but even then, progressivism is a political perpetual self-motion machine, but there is no perpetual motion, so you have to keep bringing on more bodies into the meat grinder to do it. At the same time, there's also, technological hope and prayers that might be able to deliver some of us, the elect, out of our current declining human capital, and that those that believe in optimization and the efficacy of our new technology, we can do this as well. There's a great tweet, I think it's by Bennett's Phylactery, that has been cited before by others, that, we're all, or maybe it was Enoch Powell on Twitter, Mog the Urbanite is his at, where it's basically like, listen, we're all, the future of the West is 40K, and we're all picking sides at this moment. And as someone who doesn't know jack crap about 40K, it makes me a terrible, like, reactionary right winger, because I don't know any lore about 40K. I know jack shit. But I think of the, the Silicon Valley Mark Andreessen types as sort of these, all praise the Omnissiah and get your tech priests to help sort things out. And that sort of was what I took away from the, Mark Andreessen techno-optimistic manifesto that he put out on the Andreessen Horowitz, their venture capital fund website. But, sure, we can have that. We can have our Omnissiah. We can, do more to move and shake bodies and things. But at the same time, you do have these progressive forces inside there, the Eliezer Yudkowsky, AI threat stuff. And again, I think people are the most conservative about what they know the most about, sort of Robert's Conquest 3 laws kind of coming in there. But there is this departure from society as to what makes us sacred. And I'm going to go pull up a little image here from Twitter that I thought kind of highlighted this quite perfectly about the sort of effective optimization thing here. So I'm gonna share that my screen real quick, and I will interact with chat in just a second here, guys. So, the effective accelerationism, which to me always came out of this reaction to effective altruism, and techno-optimism, just so we don't end up in a Dickensian timeline. The following scenario is unacceptable. Please, sir, we want more compute. A tiny startup megacorp. The megacorp gazed in stupefied astonishment for the small rebel for a few seconds and ran straight to the government. I beg your pardon, sir. This little startup has asked for more. There was a general start, horror depicted on every countenance. Do we understand that they asked for more after they used up the allotted? And of course, there was a lot of imagery like this. There was even sort of Mark Andreessen posting these sort of techno, religious imagery with artificial intelligence, to do it in like Byzantine style iconography, which just made my stomach feel really uncomfortable. But, and then, of course, Mark Andreessen's little claim here about the claim that the modern version of the Marxist false consciousness conceit, people cannot be trusted to know what they want and make their own decisions. And this isn't with respects to, exploitation. But I mean, every time that we see these things, right, you always have the issue of the larger guys get in, they make their money, and then they become the biggest lobbyists for regulators. And I feel like we're going to see this regardless of what happens with Silicon Valley in the immediate future. So again, you either got in on the ground floor, or you're a striver and you've managed to make some middling success, or you really are just smart and you do well for yourself. But, a lot of these guys will just become regulators. And we've seen this with Facebook. We've seen this, with Twitter throughout its history. I mean, even now, right? The whole Armistice Day protests. I would love to know how well-timed it was that Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson got their Twitter accounts back after being banned for so long. I'm pretty much okay with everyone being on the platform, but of course we all know that major Silicon Valley, companies, like, they have to deal with governments. And Elon Musk not only is the world's richest man, but also the owner of the biggest open PvP, clout-based social media. He's going to have to deal with it. But this sort of stuff, I feel like we'll see a lot of. But however, people like to get upset over proposed solutions. People like to get really angry about alternatives to what's happening. Whether you're a big techno-optimist or you are like that couple, the elite breeding couple, and that's a word I think has a lot of issues, because at the end of the day, our current ritualization of trying to make it, or the gig economy, or just trying to beat out over our current issues. And sorry, I just noticed something flying above me. Uh, all of it leads to this premier point of, well, there are problems. What do we do about it? And I think of that little web comic where someone's like, well, here are the solutions. And then he like rips up the paper and he says, I don't want solutions. I want to be angry. And if you want to be angry, odds are you have some kind of gimme, or you have some kind of job that your whole purpose is to be angry. And I think a really good example of that is sort of this National Review style conservatism, the people who yell at the top of history, the cliff of history, saying stop, even though they're like Wile E. Coyote, and they look down and they realize that they're not on the cliff anymore and things are going down rather rapidly. And so a spiritual desert emerges after World War II. We rapidly secularize in America. We take prayer out of schools, we take scripture classes out of schools, and we do everything that we can to ensure that it's just truth, justice, in the American way, and there's no other way but that way. And well, then the question becomes, well, how do I determine what's American? Well, we create this sort of mythopoetic line of progress, the Whig history, the civil rights was great, gay rights is great, history will end with luxury gay space liberalism, which is no different from gay space luxury communism, and the fact that we'll probably kill each other before that happens. But at the end of the day, the will to live gets thrown out of there because we've made it incredibly accessible for people to not have children, or to decide who and when and why, or can we have children. And predominantly this goes into the hands of one sex over the other. This is why hormonal birth control has probably killed more people than all the nuclear weapons that we've dropped or tested on combined. And not to mention the impact that's going to have on mate selection and breeding selection. Throw in our technics on top of it, like Tinder or Bumble or whatever, it makes it even more difficult. And to me, I think of Grindr, of all of those apps, because it's, well, how do homosexuals attract, multiple partners at once? Because they're far more promiscuous than heterosexual couples are, just by sheer nature. And so you're putting on a homosexual mating strategy style of just get as many as possible, swipe as much as possible onto heterosexual couples. And that is totally warped and just fucked over their entire understanding of what it means to pursue a relationship, do meaningful ones. This doesn't mean that they can't have success stories, but I find them more to be the exception than to the rule. And I do know a couple who met over Tinder, and they're now married. And so I guess props to them on that front. But people do like to get upset over proposed solutions, but people like to win as well. I think people obviously see the writing on the wall. Things are going to hell in a handbasket, so what do we do? And that National Review style conservatism, or even that American Mind style reaction to even the vitalists, right? I don't care what you think of Bronze Age pervert. I know some people like him, some people hate him, some people think he's a subversive, Zionist or whatever. He comes out with this book, and the message was, why settle for like cringe and gay National Review rent boyism, where you too can be the next kid that escapes out of Venezuela and can write about zombie Reaganism, when you could be a Giga Chad, when you could be ripped and successful and slay like ancient Bronze Age steppe warriors, right? That whole message of why settle for cringe when you could be based, or you could be cool and you could be more, is a perennially winning sales pitch throughout the history of religions, political ideology, and, self-help and stuff like that. The guy that says, hey, I've got a way to tell you how to win and how to be better, is going to attract a large crowd, and it's going to attract people that don't want to settle and don't want to be losers. Even if you aren't a loser in your real life. And there are a lot of people who I know in the vitalist camp that are engineers, college professors, competitive, sports guys in their own respective rights, fencing, so on. And so it's just like, you're attracting a little bit of everybody, from the LARPers, and this applies to religion too. all the way to the successful that are adopting a mindset or a belief system that they think helps them be more successful and generates a spark and a drive to live. And people get really upset about that. And I mean, the same thing will be said when it comes to offering techno-optimism or neo-paganism or Christian nationalism. This is all about the question of people will always usually be more open to the sales pitch of why settle when you can be better or a winner or more successful or come with me if you want to live. And so people get really upset in the face of the progressive notion. And even progressives that they have these little shibboleths, these little idols that they have to fall down to. They have to bow before the great Zimbabwe. They have to bow down and say that, Lizzo's a beautiful woman. They have to bow down and say that, like, Zidania is pretty when she's not, right? I don't know anyone in my friend circle. And again, that's anecdotal. It's a small sample size. I should put a poll out to my 22,000 followers on Twitter. Let's see what happens. Is Zidania attractive? Most people, I think, would say no. I don't find her attractive. Not for me. But at the end of the day, right, like, you have these things where we all have to just sort of acknowledge, like, oh, she's so pretty. She's so beautiful. And this is where you get the more, like, red pill, manosphere, like, I guess, misogynist shit posters on Twitter, like Billy Pratt or Bizlet, that will, they had the whole Margot Robbie mid discourse. They have, they'll quote tweet something from the 1990s and be like, yeah, Jennifer Connelly, like, that was what women looked like, 30 years ago. And one of these tweets kind of blew up saying, I think quoting Bizlet or something about that. It's just like, yeah, this was like a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10 in 1995. So like 28 years ago when I was born. And, so some of these liberals had replied, and this was something that was pointed out by Nightmare Vision on Twitter, is that, oh, that's not what the average, like, white couple looked like. Like, here's a picture of my parents from this time. And a lot of people started doing that. And you kind of realize that, like, 30 to 40 years ago, the country looked healthier. It was thinner. And there were average to good looking white people, like, just getting married and together. And you're like, wow, like, there was this desire that things were going to get better. And that there was this vision that, like, we were good looking and we were professional looking and we were beautiful. And that's, like, a nice thing to have. And so there's sort of, I understand now even more so, this nostalgia for the 1990s. The problem is that the 1990s kicked these cans down the roads of problems that are now coming home to roost. And these were cans that were kicked down the road from the 70s, 60s, and 50s that were kicked down the road to the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. But people get upset over proposed solutions. And this also now comes to the spiritual desert of people looking for answers in, say, Christianity. There are a lot of my colleagues or cohorts or people I follow on Twitter, I guess the word might be fellow travelers, but that's way more commie-oriented than I don't like, that talk about how, a lot of these, like, Christian nationalists or, like, the William Wolfs and the Wolf brothers who are calling out the wokeism and the Southern Baptist Convention are offering a religiously minded nationalism towards the United States. They're boomers that are late to the party. True. I would argue that that's a fair critique. A lot of outside of your, more reactionary or your E. Michael Jones types, a lot of the 4 dissident spaces or alternative spaces on the right wing have been more explicitly anti-modernist or at least in rejection of the old Christian faith. However, a lot of these guys have also been fighting their battles separately to the existence of dissident spaces to begin with, or they know that they can't associate as much as possible. And I think that there's some issues with that as well. However, for us in America, there's still a lot of work to do to roust that problem out. And I think a very good example of this is what's happened with Ryan Turnipseed. He's like simply raising in a very Luther-like fashion, here are my issues to your new catechism, but because you can just slander me, this is where we're at. And so you now have these progressive idolaters inside of a lot of forms of Christianity. I mean, all branches of it have this problem. In the same way, all branches of political thought have these problems, where there are just a lot of cringe, fake liberals, and trying to really not swear on these things because I do have an older audience that I try to respect. But you have a lot of fake gay and cringe and retarded liberals that will be like, well, actually, I kind of like these things, but, like, what if we made the gospel queer? Or what if we made, conservatism, like, pro-trans? Like, well, what if we had, Lady MAGA speak for us? Well, what if we had Blair White speak at TPUSA? How bad would things really be? And so all these ideologies and political theologies and religions get really fake, gay, cringe, and retarded very quickly. However, in America, there are still a lot more Christians that are on the right, politically speaking, that you can work with them. For a lot of us, and I've said this before on other speeches and other events and other talks. Listen, buddy, if you want to have the second battle of Milvian Bridge, we can have that. But I think we got a lot more like fake and libtarded stuff to deal with before you and I can duke it out like it's the fourth century. We can do that. Just let's bigger issues right now, But again, I think we have bigger fish to fry, and things like immigration, things like state-sponsored transgender surgeries, and ambitious political governors taking advantage of surveillance powers. The New York governor Katie Hochul, I don't know how to pronounce her name, had announced that she's using surveillance powers of the state to target hate speech on websites, and this is in the wake of the Israel stuff. But it's also been used to target places that, even if you don't like them, even if you don't like Peter Brimlow or you don't like Jared Taylor, like the guys over at VDare, they're being targeted by this, and they can go out and use these surveillance powers on other states. It doesn't matter that we've got say for example, like if the Beowulf Foundation were here in the United States, and they were founded in say like Nevada. Well, unless the governor of Nevada is willing to step up and do that, they can work in cooperation and have those target happen even halfway across the state. So this sort of raises the ongoing overall problem. You have an idolatry of progressivism that worships the other, that wishes for your self-destruction, and encourages you to take your own way out, either by advancing an ideology and a religion of self-destruction and self-erasure, castration, or just outright accepting your own death. And I mean, we have the Department of Justice with their community response, service, the CRS, that basically every time that a white guy gets killed by a mob of minorities, like they have to go out and coach people and let them know this. You can't tell them it's a race thing, even though it obviously is. So the idol and the focus on political aspects of our world, you have to go out and just accept and take your lumps with that sort of Anglo stiff upper lip that we're being hollowed out from the inside, but at least I'm not racist. So when it comes to solutions to these idols, or it comes to these solutions of heresy, you look towards, say, vitalism, or you look towards the resurgence of some Christians, both high church and low church, to answer these problems. And I think that this speaks to men specifically. And this is where I kind of want to divulge and digress a bit from sort of my notes here, where I think about the fact that at the end of the day, there's a lot of guys in this space that look towards what presumably, right, and I don't know every content creator's personal life and story, but they presumably go to the successful, and they presumably go towards the men that look like they have their act together. And they do this primarily for the older men. Some of this comes to me as well, although I have 2 liberal arts degrees. I can tell you what not to do, right? I opted not to go to law school because I woke up one day as a manager of an office and collecting rent for other attorneys in this 3-story house, and I woke up absolutely miserable. And I said, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, so I'm not going to go to law school, despite already sending out some applications and my LSAT scores and such. But, you look at Radical Liberation, or you look at Morgoth's Review, or you look at Dave the Distributist, who I look towards with a lot of respect as a man who kind of has his shit together. And you look towards those guys, and you see a lot of younger men ask those kind of questions. It's that parasociality. It's that fandomification of patriarchy. And this is where we exist in this weird online space where that tends to be the case. And one of the things that I've really noticed has been that, one of the... I've said this before, but a good example of this would be like, when Dave goes to Superchats on his, Fiddler's Green podcast, one of the first people that sends him money is Sam153 for $5, and he updates us on his dating life, and he tells us what he's going through. And he's a Catholic guy, and he's just trying to find a woman out there. He's trying to get a better job, and he's trying to get married, and he wants to do what is traditionally minded of us as human beings: to be successful, to be good in a trade or stock or craft, and to have a woman and to have kids. And people get upset when they like politicize wife guys to a point where it's simpery, or they make an idol out of their wife, which is very valid in criticizing. However, when it seems so inaccessible to a widespread degree of people, yeah, they're going to look towards the ones that managed to get the last chopper out of Saigon or out of Afghanistan, out of Kabul, for a more modern reference, last C5 out of Kabul, and ask them, well, how did you manage? How did you survive? How did it work for you? And so this like fandomification, parasocial patriarchy comes to my mind. And of course, you get a lot of similar answers. You have to be successful. You have to be involved in the community on a local level. You have to trust, the elders around you, and you have to actually work for it. So men in this instance like to be challenged. Men like to be told, do this to succeed. Men like to be told to be strong, to lift, to be successful, to be the king of your trade. And, and sometimes that involves faking it if you make it. But also, men like the challenge that comes in the spiritual aspect of it. Men like the challenge that is commanded by us, especially for Christians, to be holy. That is an impossible task outside of a strong church life, strong faith, strong belief, and living in accordance to the tradition that you're a part of. And so to be holy is an incredibly difficult challenge. And so you wonder why a lot of young guys turn towards Catholicism, or turns towards Orthodoxy, or turns towards even neo-paganism. They want to have a spiritual sense of identity that requires a challenge out of them, whether that is conquering your passions. For instance, it is the beginning of the Nativity fast for us in the Orthodox Church, at least on the new calendar. So, I gotta act like I'm in Lent mode and be, fast and be a little vegan for a little bit before Christmas. That's a challenge, but you got a prayer life, you got your friends, you got to do it. The problem is that work is required to do that. And so when you hear answers that are so default dismissive, oh, just go to church or go find a friend group and do it, it's such a cop-out. It is a cop-out because they don't want to tell you actually, no, it takes a lot of work. I'm at church 3 to 4 times a week, and that's a majority of my friend group and a lot of my networking group. I'm with people that want to start a farmer's co-op to have food security, because religion is still one of those few ways that you can kind of discriminate and defend yourself. And so that means cattle, gardens, corn, greenhouses. How are we all setting this up? Are we setting up the right legal paperwork? Is everything set to go? Who's going to drive? Who's going to deliver? Who's got the freezers? That's a lot of work. Taking care of the sick, the elderly, your friends, watching over the kids, making sure that someone's looking out for you. Did your wife just have a baby? Is there a food schedule out so people can deliver meals to you while you take care of the newborn? Is that an option for you? There's a lot of work that goes into that. And if you're only going to go because people tell you to go, because they say that that's the right thing or the based thing to do, they're missing the point, and I don't think they're giving you the best advice. Simply telling you to go ghost dance. Go huddle around and sing Hallelujah or Kumbaya or whatever you do, and not put the effort in. There's a lot of lefties that say you got to do the work. And that's the one thing that they're probably right about. Like anything requires work to do. And, you can't just simply listen to me tell you to just go do things. You actually have to take the time to invest in. This is why you've noticed Dave transition so quickly from just the content creation to basket weaving, hosting events, networking. This is why the Old Glory Club wants chapters, so men can meet other like-minded men and do cool things like, build stuff together, do business together, break bread together, to worship together, and to go learn a new skill or a new trade, be welders together, be, emergency response guys together. Because the more successful and the more laborious you are rewarded for that. And to a large degree, it is salvific. But I guess to sort of bring us towards the through line out of all of this is that, you have sort of the state-mandated progressive idols that you have to bow down to. Everyone probably has to deal with HR if you work in a larger company, and you have to deal with sort of these progressive shibboleths if you work in a trade. Not so much, because the trades, of course, are still male dominated. And I'm not going to tell you not to go to college. You obviously should go to college. You should go to, get a post grad, and you should get a law degree, because we're going to need lawyers. You're going to need qualified elite professionals who understand logistics, who understand supply lines, who understand how bridges are built. I would definitely trust one of you guys to rebuild the I-10 in Los Angeles than I would, someone that some subcontractor comes out and it's a bunch of guys that, will just, rub some Vicks on it and it'll be better, right? I want you guys to be the ones that keep my bridges alive. I want you to be the ones that argue for people like the next Derek Chauvin, who just happened to be the cop who did his job while some guy overdosed. At the same time, I also want you to be priests and to be good parents that are going to teach their kids, no, you have a tradition, you have an identity that isn't just kill yourself. And I do have hope, at least in the future, for the more high church people, because it's all the more conservative and reactionary young men that tend to be heading off to seminary these days. However, at the end of the day, we're in this sort of desert of belief, and you're in a war for it, as Dave likes to say, and as others in the 40K references aside. You're in this war for belief because at the end of the day, the only beliefs that are being handed to you are decrepit, desiccated corpses of old traditions that they're still trying to euthanize. Or you have progressive traditions that will simply tell you, as long as we have good fusion restaurants and you look the other way about the crime rate and blatant anarcho-tyranny that is directed towards people that look like me and you, then yeah, you can join on. You too could be the next, Troon streamer on Twitch telling me how great Baldur's Gate 3 is or something like that, right? You too can make the next Depression Quest if you want a little bit of a throwback. You too can sleep with the next games journalist and kick off a whole new Gamergate 2.0 if you really wanted. And I think that that's the big issue that we have to deal with is that in our current form of society, right, Marshall McLuhan, I thought, pointed it out quite well in the Gutenberg Galaxy, that we're not just typographic men anymore. We don't just rely on written word. We don't have histories or biographies. Nowadays on the internet, and I've written about this just now for the Glory Club, and I did a Twitter thread on it, we don't have biographies of men. We have lore. We have story arcs. We have character arcs. Or as AA likes to do with his show, he has seasons of television. We're no longer typographic. We're no longer just the great tomes of intellectual literary work. You're all listening to me right now. And what is that? That is a more, as McLuhan would call it, oriental, or as what Harold Innis would call it, it is a spaced, biased form of communication. It is an oral tradition that passes these things down to you. Whereas the empire, the regime, right, it uses more time-oriented forms of communication. And I'm going to have a video essay out on this a little bit, but I'm going to give you a little teaser of it right now. And that teaser, of course, is that, these time-biased forms of communication, they're managerialized, they're decentralized, but they don't last very long in terms of time. This is why you constantly have to reify, and you constantly have to tell people what is the correct form of belief. What is the current thing? What is the current thing that progressives are about? And this is why you see a lot of old progressives say, oh, well, the left left me. No, you're just a leftist that never got on board with the next current progressive idol. Oh, I'm a TERF. Well, you're still a feminist. You're still a progressive. You're just upset that trannies are the current thing and you're not it. The same thing with James Lindsay. James Lindsay is a new atheist liberal that supported Obama both times and was anti-George Bush and hates Christianity. But he's considered a conservative figure because he's not on board with the latest progressive idol. Oh, this Gnostic, trans, racial Marxism. No, buddy, it's just progressivism. It's just leftism. And you're upset the latest batch of leftism left your straight white male ass behind because the only thing that you were concerned about was new atheism. That's really what that was. And so these time forms of communication, they have to constantly reify and reiterate these new forms so the message is on track, and it happens to be leftist. And I had a conversation last night with some colleagues of mine over at the OGC, and I asked everyone. I said, do you know how bad it is that in my brain I have like all these names of dead African Americans from police shootings or police encounters. They get turned into these progressive martyrs and idols throughout the years. Breonna Taylor, Freddie Gray, Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, the whole Ferguson riots, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rodney King, which of course the Rodney King one probably has a notable exception to the rule because that was pretty brutal. But again, I have this like lengthy history of constantly reifying, what progressives would call like the harm and the destruction of black and brown bodies. But because of their method of communication, it has to constantly be reified, has to constantly be brought out by all these decentralized managerial forms of HR managers and long-housed, pink-haired affiliates screaming at the top of their lungs that because I want something for myself and people that look like me, I'm the bad guy. I'm a genocidal maniac. But that is something I think that's sort of important for us to consider. So to conclude sort of this rambling bit of a talk here today in this sort of spiritual desert and this age, and I will go through chat, I will answer super chats, and I will interact with you guys for, depending on how much we have for before my next little assignment that gets sent to me at work via email. In the Psalter, and you'll hear this all the time, is trust not in princes and the sons of men, for in them there is no salvation. I sing that every Sunday. And, I think that a lot of people have made the right conclusion that it is about sort of local power and localism. However, this doesn't mean we can completely ignore what's happening at the state level or the federal level. I got some heat for it, but you don't have to care about politics. You can be totally clear-pilled about these things, or as Curtis Yarvin likes to say. But at the end of the day, you don't have to care about politics, but politics is going to care about you. The left is really good at the whole personalist political thing, and everything's a leftist statement. From the jeans that you wear, to the coffee that you drink, to the music that you listen to. You can either be a chud or you can listen, and tell me how great Dua Lipa is or how great Lizzo is. That's sort of the mechanism where it is. So I don't think that you're going to get your perfect, based red-pilled reactionary fash wave Caesar who, watched Panther Den edits when he was like, 16 years old and was inspired to be the great new leader of the West and save us all. I don't think that that's going to come. Could be wrong. I kind of would be happy to be wrong, but I'm a little more realistic or pessimistic about it, however you may take it. I wouldn't hold my breath, is what I'm trying to say. However, you can put your faith in things that are, of course, of a higher power or an abstract will to live. People like to make fun of the prequels a lot, which is fair for Star Wars fans. But, they say, she lost the will to live, episode 3, right? Well, the West, large and writ large, has lost the will to live. It is okay with its replacement. It is okay with elites that hates it. And even with like lefties that I do know in my real world environment or inhabit a lefty sort of job frame, like, psychiatric assistants and things like that. Those that tend to the mentally ill and the homeless and such. Even them that are more progressively minded are just like, well, really, we've done this to ourselves. But, this is the way things are now. That's the way I have to believe it. I will be, I guess that movie was okay. Air Jordans, right? We're having biopics about movies to Americanize the next generation of people. That really, America's always been about the worship of the other and selling consumer product to get excited for next product. Same thing with a film about Flaming Hot Cheetos or McDonald's, although the founders a much better movie than those other two are by a significant degree. And so we live in an age of progressive idols. We live in an age where it is targeting the ancien faith, the ancient faith, the traditions of old, to say that actually, no, America in the West has always been multicultural. America in the West has always been anti-white. And it has always been animated towards this never-ending push of liberation and desire to end the world that we understand that is of today. It's not a great sort of world to live in, But for them, they're willing to accept it. For people like myself, for people who are maybe not Christian or want to believe in something else, you will have to find it, I think, in a lot of ways in person. This is why the basket weaving is so important. This is why the meeting in real life sort of deal, or making the time to go offline for a little bit. Yeah, Twitter isn't real life, but it also kind of is. But at the same time, I wasn't on Twitter last night. I was at my friend's house with his wife and my friends from church, and we all had dinner together, and we all pigged out on barbecue as a friend group outside of church, enjoying fellowship, conversation, and listening to my subdeacon talk in a strange, funny sets of voice impressions, and learned that he can do a really good John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart talking back to one another. And those are the things that you're going to want to remember. And more importantly, those are the things that you're going to want to do. There is all this sort of talk about atomization, and that is very true. The question becomes, are you going to just wallow in your 40 years in the desert, or are you going to continue on to the promised land in the firm conviction that even if you and I don't make it, our kids might, our grandkids might? Are you willing to put that effort in? And in an age of idols, and in an age of progressivism, and an age of suicidal ideation as the state religion of the West, especially in America, which then gets propagated to the rest of the Western world and in pop culture, are you willing to not burn incense before that idol? Are you willing to say, no, I don't think I'm going to say Sedania is attractive. No, I don't think that your fake, gay, cringe, libtarded human resources policy is a good idea. If that's the case, are you willing to accept the consequences for that? Earlier this month, I think at the beginning of the month, we found out some Louder with Crowder, of all people, a man who's got his own issues with fame and family life, had released bits and pieces of the True Manifesto from the Nashville shooter earlier this year, back in February. Very anti-white, very anti-Christian. And I had said at the U.S. Sildings Conference, I said, if anything of what that shooting had told people, it was that martyrdom is very much back on the table for believers, especially in the West. We've been very comfortable, and we've been very comfortable with, accepting that when we sign up for this, when we die with the old man, and we're baptized into Christ's death and resurrection, that also means that, you're doing this also with your life. And the question becomes, what are we willing to sacrifice to do so? Are we willing to sacrifice a little bit right now for something greater? Are you willing to work with people that may not agree with you 100%, but agree with you on 90%, if it means that you have a working coalition, whether that be a nonprofit, a co-op, a business, etc., a political strategy locally, to win? And then you can divvy out the issues afterwards. Those are the things that I think come to mind in this age of a spiritual desert. And having the willpower to know that no matter how much it sucks, maybe you want it to suck more. That way you can be stronger. Or that all things good and useful that we're doing right now is for a much greater and bigger picture at the end. And I think I'll leave it at that for this little talk. It's about an hour long. Haven't gotten any notifications or anything, so we're good to go with respects to work and answering some super chats. And I, of course, will answer any questions that you guys have in chat. But yeah, these were just some things that I wanted to rant about. I know it's either been the Digital Archipelago or the Stalin's War stuff as of late, so I wanted to just put together some notes and put a live stream out that wasn't the usual bits, and have something for you guys in that respect to talk about. Because, we can listen to book club, we can listen to Gio and I laugh about things, but sometimes it's good to just get your thoughts out. So I'm going to turn my camera off for a minute and shoo this bee out of my room. I don't know how he got in here. And then I'll talk to chat and super chat. So give me 1 second, guys. All right, he's out of the room now. Yeah. Let's see here. Building a real community is the antidote to fake inclusion politics and sloganeering. I mean, to some extent, yeah. I take the do the work, or the just do X, Y, and Z is a terrible option. What are options for men who want a more martial way of life? Well, for example, a friend of mine, he he's about 3 or 4 hours from me, but I go visit him on when I can. You he just gets people involved in fencing clubs. So fencing is a great way. The SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronism, is a really good example. I did that in college. A martial way of life means every weekend I go get dressed up in a suit of armor and I get my ass beat and a guy in another suit of armor with a historically accurate to the period weapon. So, I mean, if you want a more martial way of life, gun clubs, fishing clubs, camping, hiking, I mean, if it doesn't exist, then you have the opportunity to say, hey, I have experience in fighting or self defense or fencing or whatever. And, let's go start a club. Even if you do kendo or something like that, right? Like, I love fencing in high school and college. I did it in high school and college. And, when Clausewitz on war says that, war is a duel, there is beauty to it. There is this sacramentology to it. It is sacred. There is a dual aspect to it that is quite beautiful. I mean, this is why Tucker Carlson got that weird bit when he said that's not how white men fight. Well, he was right. We fight with this sort of code and honor. And I mean, if you want a more martial way of life, I would definitely do that in your respect. The problem is that they hate asserting themselves in this respect. I mean, and instead they just like it. Louis Cachet, I think that's the real issue. I think they're here. IDK, if I'm ready for the Christmas frog. Well, I hate to break it to you, Record Deepness, but for me, the Christmas aspect is here now for sure. That's all surrogate activities, though. Well, I mean, yeah, it is surrogate activities, but I mean, there's still activities in which people can engage in a martial way of life. And I mean, I also would expect that if you want to have a martial way of life, then I mean, one, there's always the Legion, right? But additionally, you're going to have to also, I would suggest activities that would require you to be in, say, emergency response, right? My neighbor and I and a few other men in the area. I'm not part of the volunteer fire department, just for health reasons, right? Between my osteoporotic ass due to anti-rejection medication and just the whole different post-transplant life that I live. But I mean, like, I know how to do basic first aid. I practice once a month with my neighbors on how to clear trees from the road. Emergency response is a great way to still have a martial way of life, I think. Yeah, I was partially facetious, yes, but I mean, I know at least one person who's done it. But I mean, there are no great battles, I think, right now at this current moment. A lot of the great battles are going to be confronted on an individual level and a community level of how you respond to them. Do you know how to defend yourself? Do you know, I think of the Mystery Grove tweet, you need to be getting bigger because there's a bunch of rabid anti-white communists out there that would love to just break into your house and kill you like a farmer in South Africa. The martial way of life is discipline and self-discipline. I mean, that's what meekness means, really, is to be self-disciplined. Are you going to stick to a concurrent gym schedule? Do you do high intensity cardio? Do you work out? Do you fight? Do you do these things? Do you spar? I mean, Pat Casey does sparring, for God's sakes. And I mean, he doesn't look like it, but he knows how to kick somebody's ass if it came to it. And I think that's a good example. Practice clearing trees from the road. Like, someone fells a tree or there's a storm or there's electrical wires and you just move that stuff out of the way. And things like that. And, you might as well ask where I think the difference between that stuff, though, is that you have to move yourself out of the way in respect to there are LARPers. The question is like, when people join a religion or when people join a particular set of beliefs and ideologies, they don't get really up about, dogma and doctrine until after they convert. And there are numerous studies that show this. And in fact, there was a recent study that came out, and I only know this because I Fuel Tide and I follow each other on Twitter, is that he was talking about a report on the impact of presidential elections and elections in general on fertility. And when Trump got elected in 2016, white fertility increased in the same way that it would increase if you started giving people money to have kids. And immigrant fertility went down on the same level as unemployment would affect fertility. And so people genuinely want a vision that tells others, I want to fucking live. There's something that is worth living for, and that I'm not going to take the fent, that I'm not going to take the opioids, I'm not going to get addicted to hydrocodone or whatever, and I'm not going to kill myself. This is what you're dealing with, regardless if you want a martial way of life, if you're a vitalist, if you're a religion, if you're a pagan. I would expect all of you, as a general rule and expectation, to have a belief structure and a system that tells me your life is worth living. That whatever you believe in is going to have something for the next generation. Is going to have something that says, I'm not going to be owned by libtards that want me to kill myself. I want to live. I want to succeed. I want to do this. And that's what I would expect. And I think that there's a good aspect in that respect, with that respect to it. And yeah, converts can be the worst because they're the ones that I think have huge issues with the, as it's called in the Calvinist tradition. I think it's called the stage cage. You want to profess to everyone how holy and pious you are and things like that. Stay away from religious Twitter. Stay away from online religiosity. It's the fucking worst. I can't stand it. I follow some people, but I'm not in on it. I don't quote post about it because I feel like if that's what you're doing, then you're no different than the Pharisee who marks and paints his face to let you know that he's fasting and he's so holy. It's very Pharisaical. I'm not a fan of it. And that's certainly a big issue there. No, it's not that they have a leg up, it's that they have totally different issues to tackle. Because at the end of the day, I'm still beholden to supply chains and I'm still beholden to the same issues that a lot of urban and suburban guys have. The cool thing about suburbia and urban areas is that everything's there. It's all central or it's 5 minutes away. If I want to do something in the city, if I want to go to like a new founding meetup that they've got in like their Dallas office or whatever, I got to drive more or less 2 hours to get there. You know, like the urban stuff is totally different from rural, and the suburban stuff is a weird mix of in between. It's not that they have a leg up, it's that they have totally different problems. And unfortunately, you know, not everyone can retreat to the hillside. Not everyone can go buy 80 acres of land in Montana and say that that's what they're going to do. They have commitments and requirements that are totally different. And so when people get uppity and upset about like, oh, you know, based rural, you know, homesteaders who live in the middle of nowhere like me, and I'm not even a homesteader. I mean, I still live relatively close to civilization. You know, if you go live out in BFE, Idaho, you know, like that's the way to win. We're just going to retreat to the hilltops. We'll be like the American Taliban. No, I want my cities to be cool again. You know, Detroit and New York and other in Los Angeles, these were considered to be the Parises, the Londons, the Berlins of the New World. I want that again. And it's going to require urban organization. It's going to require a culture that suits the urban environment. And cities are still a place that we should not abandon. And I mean, Christianity, when it took off in Rome, was in cities, in urban areas. You know, the word for pagan, paganos or whatever, was a word for outsider, not from the city, in a ruralite. You want your cities to be successful. And if you live in a city or you work a white collar job in a city, you want to fucking succeed. You want to live there, in that respect. And so I think that it's important to not eat the bugs, to not give up your cities, but also recognize with some, you know, self-awareness, hey, let's not go on Martin Luther King Jr. Street, and we'll just go over here, right? You know, that's an unfortunate requirement in this place. Unfortunately, however, as demographics change in the cities, it's probably going to just stay really just shitty. But it doesn't mean that, you know, you should abandon them forthright. I do think that it requires, to some extent, in these respects, I think. But yeah. And Belial Bradley for $10 US. He just has like a wave or a clapping emoji over on Entropy. Thank you very much, sir. I greatly appreciate that. Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from, EWD, because this was the first Sildings conference over a year ago now. That this was Charlemagne's speech, was that the suburbs are really deracinating and atomizing, because you still have, there's nothing that's there. You know, kids used to play out in the street. I lived in a suburb, and one of the places my dad was deployed, and you know, kids could play out in the street and hang out and do some things, and that words. but now I have to like go scroll up and see various forms of chat. So apparently I missed something, you know, and I mean, like, there's yeah, there's a, oh, sorry, hit a button. You're good. No worries. Sorry, I'm reading chat. But I mean, yeah, there are problems with the suburbs. This is that no one trusts them. No one does this. No one says X, Y, Z. And that's a problem. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's not a single kid trick or treating. I mean, that's another problem, right? Um, and it's not, no, hello. What I'm referring to is, unless you are online. I'm not against online evangelization. The issue is that with a lot of online stuff is that um it oftentimes either leads to like really cringe street preaching, or it leads to just these various camps fighting with one another. I wasn't exposed to it when I came back to Christianity. I didn't go to it. I was told by friends to avoid it and to go to a church. You're going to get more answers by attending a service and by asking people questions and seeing how people live their lives than people pontificating how great they are. It goes back to the same issue time and time again of, can you walk the walk alongside talking the talk? And yeah, the suburbs are better than dealing with a crap ton of deadly and painful diversity. It's not that I'm against people talking about it on the internet. In fact, it's the mechanism where a lot of people do convert, and I'm happy for them. It's just that it has its own problems, as with any online ecosystem. I'm not part of it. I have an uneasy, feeling about the Jay Dyers of the world. I do take issue with the debate me bro stuff, because I feel like you're trying to take a mystery out of something that is mysterious and sacramental, and go for it. But that's my personal take. If you really like it, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. It's not something that I did, and it's not something that I actively consume. And perhaps that's to my detriment. But that's the life that I live. That's certainly the way that it goes. I'm gonna refresh Entropy here real quick. But yeah, I mean, to see people not trick or treating, it's really, that kind of is depressing. Even a shitty holiday that makes people think that the religious, the sacred, the otherworldly is nothing but make believe and playful is, I think, particularly dangerous, and that's concerning. Why trick or treat when there's a Fortnite event online? Well, what did I do on Halloween? I mean, I'm not really a Halloween guy, but on Tuesday I was with friends and things. But yeah, I mean, again, they're not my cup of tea. It's just my stuff there. Yes, technical difficulties. There was a bee, and there's one still. I wonder if they're getting in through my old air conditioning unit. That'll be fun to deal with. Do not underestimate the power of yeah. Well, one can be hopeful. It's like empty calories. Well, I mean, this is what Johann Kurtz was talking about, and other people have said this too. It's just that if you're gonna get uppity about sports, I hope that you play sports as well. Like, I still enjoy fencing. I've recently decided to go buy and get sized up for a mask and a kit and everything, and I'm going to start doing it again, because I found out that one of my friends from church does it. So I have a sparring partner now. So I'm going to go do more of that. People should be more martial in their life, whether that's self-control, with what they eat, whether it's with their prayer life, whether it's with, fighting or dueling or working out. Again, there needs to just be more than words. And I like to think that, yeah, I can talk about these things, but at the end of the day, I also have to hold myself to it. I think about James 3 all the time, and from his general epistle, that just like, teachers are judged more harshly. Every word that we will say will be used against us one day. And so I would hope that whatever I'm instructing is in good counsel and good ideas, and that I have to hold myself to it. Because if I don't, then I'm a hypocrite, number one, and two, I'm a really shitty example. So I hope that by the next Sildings conference, or the next event that maybe I try and organize here in Dallas or something. I don't know. I should probably work on that. That maybe whatever I look a little healthier. I have gained some weight, and I need to lose some, and I should be fitter, and I should run a faster mile than I currently do. So I work out in the mornings. I wake up, pray, and I do some cardio. Like, you have to do these things. You gotta be better. There's also a lot of like controlled dialectical stuff. Yeah, and this is the story of how conservatives were made. Yes, leftists that just didn't bow down to the next shibboleth. Oh, yeah, this is from, I remember you from the comment section on a few other videos. But no, good on doing these things. You know, if you're going to get a job for trucking, and we still need truckers, this is what you're going to have to definitely worry about and work on. Yes, God bless Sam5153 and his guests. He's definitely going through it for real. Yeah, aren't we all? Aren't we all? So yeah, I definitely do agree with that respect. But yeah, I do think that you have some stuff that you have to working about. Well, look at that. Well, good. You need people that are willing to be more martial on those respects. I think that that's definitely a good case there. Diet, yeah, diet's also very important. And yes, bee free. There's a lot of bees. I'll have to take care of that in a hot minute. I wonder where they came from. But yeah, rural life can be quite lonely. Well, I mean, this again, rural life can be lonely, you know, and you have to have friends and you have to have family that you're willing to talk to about these things and to do those things in order to make sure that you're not. But yeah, those are the big stuff that I think is really important to address. But so I will probably just conclude here as we get to ourself at the end here before I have to head back to work. Simply that you and I, and regardless of whatever tradition that you come from, your belief system, Christianity or not, there is a large spiritual desert that we are in right now that is saying, you know, you can either stick it out or you can conveniently offer yourself to this orgiastic release of suicide that is leftism and bow down to its idols and bow down to everything that is out there. And at the end of the day, it will be difficult. And like I said in my little rambly civilizational bottleneck video that, you know, my favorite comment that I got from that video was someone doing like, when the Prudentialist does a black pill video and it's a smiley face. And then it's like when Morgoth does a black pill video and it's like sad face. I thought that was very funny. But I mean, we are in a bottleneck. You're not going to save everyone. And I think it's going to be important of how can you save yourself and your traditions. We have a much more fused together form of communication nowadays where it is focused on oral traditions, lore, and history of people and ideas and beliefs, just as it had been once in the past. And it's sort of come back now in this new digital medium as we fuse together the typographic with the chronographic man. And yeah, you should definitely give it a shot. I would highly recommend it. Go try out and go to the HEMA group. The fencing stuff's fantastic. But at the end of the day, these are the things that we have to do. You may not save everyone, but can you save yourself and can you save your family and your progeny for the future? And as I've said since the very beginning of when I've made this channel, my goal would be to plant the vine and fig tree my children and grandchildren sit under and will not be afraid. That's what I aim for, and that's what I believe. So with that, thank you again, Belial Bradley, for the $10. Thank you all for listening in. I greatly appreciate it. And I will see you all this Friday with a new video of sorts on communication and where things are going for us in the future. It'll be a little more McLuhan-Innes stuff that I've been binging into a lot of. But take care, everyone, and I'll see you all this Friday very soon. God bless and goodbye.